everyone who has joined us today from Afghanistan, Europe, and the USA, and as always from all around the world. First of all, I would like to express my heartfelt appreciation to everyone, uh, to all of you for joining in this important webinar with us. We extend our sincere thanks to Refugees International along with the organizing partners are the Last Haven and Resilience Environment and Humanitarian Aid organization for their efforts to making this webinar possible. Additionally, I also would like to acknowledge and appreciate the hard work put in by the communication department at the Refugees International for their exceptional job in designing and promoting this event and making it possible and accessible to a wider audience. My name is Qiyamuddin Ikram, and I will be moderating the first part of this webinar. I'm one of the climate educators from Afghanistan. I hold a master's degree from the United Nations University in climate and disaster management and have been working in the field of climate and disaster both inside and outside of Afghanistan for the last few years. And I am also delighted to introduce another expert, Jocelyn Perry, who will be joining me to co-host this webinar. Jocelyn is the Senior Advocate and Program Manager um, uh, for Climate Displacement at the Refugees International. And she brings her over a decade of experience in advocacy and policy making related to climate-induced displacement. Today, we have gathered to address the critical issue of Afghanistan exclusion from global climate negotiations for the past 3 years. Since 2021, with a particular focus on the upcoming COP28 in the UAE. We will also discuss the missed opportunities and emphasize the crucial role that humanitarian and international community must play in supporting the most vulnerable Afghan communities in the face of climate change and its related impacts in terms of technical and financial support in this situation. Climate change is a global challenge that affects us all, and it's really important that we have we leave no one behind. Afghanistan's role in contributing to climate change is minimal, and it's relatively very low, but it is one of the most vulnerable and affected countries by the impacts of climate change. Each year, it experiences with extreme droughts and floods and leading to devastating consequences and displacing millions of people, thousands of people. In recent years, climate-related disasters have been forced over 1 million people to flee their homes. According to the Informed Risk Index for 2023, which is one of the platform for assessing the risk categories, Afghanistan ranks fourth on the list of countries most at risk. And the lack of access now to climate finance to support climate change mitigation and adaptation efforts in the country could further increase vulnerability and exposure to climate disaster and leading to more displacement and migration now and in the future. And therefore, it is crucial now to discuss this pressing issue and advocate for the Afghan people at every available platform like the upcoming COP28 and increase our collective efforts to build resilience in the face of climate challenges. To discuss this important webinar and this important topic in this webinar, we have an esteemed panel of experts, each bringing a wealth of knowledge and experience to shed light on the issue to discuss this issue with us. Please join me in welcoming them. I will introduce the panelists first, and then I will ask the question from them. We are privileged to have Dr. Fazal Akhtar, a distinguished expert in climate change and water resource management. He's a senior researcher and currently working at the Center for Development Research, ZIF, at the University of Bonn, Germany. Another expert, we have Dr. Muhammad Asim Mayar. He is a water resource management expert and a former lecturer at Kabul Polytechnic University in Kabul. He is currently working as a postdoctoral researcher at the Leibniz Center for Agriculture Landscape Research in Germany. We are also grateful to have Izzatullah Siddiqui, who has like much experience in environmental governance, climate change, and disaster management, and having worked with various national and international organizations in Afghanistan. He also served as the ex-deputy minister technical at the National Environmental Protection Agency in Afghanistan. Joining us is Alice Thomas, who is the executive director of the Central Asia Institute, a nonprofit organization that works to advance access to education, especially for girls in remote and mountainous areas of Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Tajikistan. Alice has 19 years of experience in international nonprofits with a focus on refugees, disaster management, environmental issues, and good governance. We have another expert, Nasratullah Mateen, a dedicated environmental and climate specialist and youth activist from Afghanistan. Currently, he is pursuing a master in environment and land engineering in Italy. He is also actively involved in his NGO, The Last Haven, which advocates for environmental protection in Afghanistan. Now let me ask, that was the introduction of the panelist, and we are grateful that we have an esteemed panelist here in this webinar. Now let me ask the first question. So now we are coming to the questions. So let me ask the first question from Dr. Asim Mayar. Thank you, Dr. Asim Mayar, for joining us today as a distinguished water expert and having lots of experience in this field in climate and water resource management. Your knowledge in this field is of great importance to our discussion. The question is just, please, could you please just share your expertise and your experience regarding the specific climate changes and trends that Afghanistan has been experiencing in the recent years? We are just particularly interested in any significant shifts in temperature, precipitation patterns, or extreme weather events. So the floor is yours, and your insight will be more appreciated.
Thank you very much. And also appreciate the host of this event for conducting and raising the voice of Afghans that are again absent in the COP28 annual conference tackling the climate change issues. Actually, climate change is affecting Afghanistan as well, because the entire atmosphere of the Earth is shared, and global warming does not look to the political boundaries. So far, we have seen the consequences of the climate change in multiple forms. First of all, it raised the temperature more than 1.5 degrees currently in Afghanistan. It has been recorded. But that is not very sensible to everyone in the normal life. However, this 1.5 degree is, I do consider it as an equivalent to a fever that a patient suffers. Usually, the human body has a temperature of 27 degrees, but when he got fever, it rises 1 degree or 1.5 degree maximum. So if this fever continue for more than 3 days, the medical doctor says that the patient will die if he is not urgently treated. So climate change is exactly similar to this phenomenon. And the problem is the fever fortunately has medicine which stops the heat suddenly or urgently, but the climate change does not have any medicine as well. And that's why the world is now focusing on adaptation. And in simple terms, the adaptation means to improve the resilience of the person, of the sick person, to struggle with the sickness or the fever. So this is that we are now, the adaptation, through adaptation, enrich or support the local communities to improve their resilience. And that's why those communities are most vulnerable, who are weak, and who are, I would say, cannot resist the sickness. So through this example, I simplified the climate change, but in turn, it's an umbrella for multiple things in Afghanistan. First of all, it brings the heat a little bit, but another consequence is that it affected the water cycle. So usually Afghanistan lacks the infrastructure for water storing the reservoir to regulate the flow for agriculture, for domestic, and for other uses. So previously, snow in the mountains were playing a role as a reservoir, and that's why the snow was there, and it was melting gradually and irrigating the agriculture. But nowadays, the snow not only reduced considerably. If you look at the FuseNet website, you would see there are a record of more than 2 meters depth reduction in the snow depths. And in addition to that reduction, the snow melts 2 months early in the southern Afghanistan, like in the west. So particularly in the Helmand River Basin, in the Harihud River Basin, and also in Kabul River Basin. So you see, once the reservoir level has been reduced, which was in the snowfall, the second one, the reservoir is being emptied before the time that was supposed to. So that's why now we have tension over water in the summer, particularly again in the Helmand River Basin, that had higher tension and political level with Iran and also in other countries, in other neighbors. So the same phenomenon is occurring in all 5 river basins of Afghanistan, but the most prominent is the Helmand River Basin, which has less water and the higher temperature change. In the Amur River Basin, though the global warming affect that one as well, but the snow melting is compensated by the glaciers melt. So the glaciers there melt rapidly, and few years later we would have less glaciers. In addition to this change, there are also heat waves in the summer, which are causing health consequences for the vulnerable old people and also the children. In addition to that one, there are forest fires that recently occurred almost every year in Afghanistan. And due to lack of precipitation in the summer, that continue for consecutive days and cause considerable losses. So this, in addition to this one, there is a drought. So the frequency of the drought has also been increased and has doubled comparing to the previous decades. For example, if you look at the past decade, 2011, we have had the drought from 2017 and 18 due to La Nina event, and we again have the drought in 2021 until now. That's 3 years. So only 2 years there were wet years, or one of them was wet, which was 2019, and 2020 was a normal water year. So now we have 3 years of drought. Drought is considerably affecting the agriculture and food production in Afghanistan. So these factors, in addition to that one, is flood that also brings social losses to the communities mostly in the form of flash flood. So, for example, in Afghanistan, the Parwan flood occurred in 2020 and caused 200 people losses in Parwan. And also last year, there were floods in Logar, in Wardak, and all other cities. So during the drought, we have flash floods, and during the wet years, we have spring floods. For example, next year, which is predicted to be wet, there would be definitely multiple flood events. So these all events together combined and affect agriculture sector, which is a main source of the food production for the population of Afghanistan. So drought affects the agriculture about 30%, and that is directly reducing the crop production in the country. So usually Afghanistan requires about 6 million tons of wheat, but during the drought year, Afghanistan can grow or cultivate about half of it, and half of them is imported. So in the normal year, 2/3 of the wheat is cultivated in the country. So 1/3 of the wheat is lost due to the climate change. And if we transform this effect into the GDP, recently World Bank reported that the agricultural losses in 2022 were 6.6%. So that's a considerable amount. You see, any drought event or 1-year drought event which has been induced by the climate change bring about 8 or 7% or about 10% losses in a country, and that's considerable. So because the losses are not on the agriculture, but also livestock and other forms, so we can, if you sum up, it would be around 10% of the GDP of a country. So this one is causing a lot of losses in the country, but unfortunately there have been no adaptation programs in the recent 3 years, because most of the programs, almost all, has been suspended because of the sanctions and because of the political shift in the country.
We are coming to those things, and I think you're just finished the question. So yeah, thank you so much for your valuable insight into Afghanistan climate changes and trends and resulting impacts, particularly the droughts. Yeah, we have seen like frequent droughts for the last in the last 5-6 years. We had in 2018 and then consecutively for the last 3 years, and its resulting impacts on agriculture and farmers and livestock. Thank you so much. And I think your expertise will provide a crucial understandings of the challenges faced by the country and its people. And we greatly appreciate your contribution to our discussion, and stay with us. We will come back to you. Now I will ask my second question. So from Dr. Fazal Akhtar. First of all, I'm really grateful and I'm very thankful to Dr. Fazal Akhtar for being with us. Just to build us on our previous discussion about climate change in Afghanistan, I would like to delve deeper into their consequences. Dr. Asim Mayar shared valuable information about the climate changes and its impacts and trends, etc. How have these climate changes contributed to increased vulnerability and humanitarian crisis within Afghanistan, particularly in terms of food security, displacement issues, water resources issues, and the current alarming humanitarian crisis that have been experiencing so far as a result?
Thank you very much, Kian, for the nice arranging this nice discussion. I'm happy to be with you today. In order to extend slightly on what my colleague said already, maybe a slight background to for those people who are not aware of Afghanistan. In Afghanistan, agriculture sector is the main economy generator, actually, and then especially a limited irrigated area, for example, it's around 3.1 to 3.6 million hectares. That employs around 60% plus people. So this is the main income source for Afghans. Regarding the current shifts in terms of climate change in Afghanistan, as Dr. Mayar said already, we are already dependent on imports. Wheat is the main staple food which is consumed 3 times a day at least in Afghanistan. And we are not even self-reliant in production of the wheat for the 35 million plus minus population of Afghanistan. What we already observe in Afghanistan is a clear shift in the climatic trends. We have a recent publication already which actually verified the changes already occurred within the Afghanistan's water resources sector. As you might know, that more than 80% of water in Afghanistan comes from the snowmelt, actually. So that's the main source of water for us throughout the country. And then historically, it has been after the month of March, with the temperature rise, it used to melt down and feed our, fill our reservoirs. And then the peak demand period for our conventional cropping pattern, it was from April, May, and June mainly, for example. But the climatic projections also and the ground realities already proved that with the earlier rise in temperature, we are losing this water plus parts of the glaciers, permanent snow actually, earlier than it should have been, for example. But the problem is that the conventional cropping pattern is still there. What I want to highlight is in easy words would be that we needed maximum amount of water for irrigating our crops during the months of March, April, and June, and primarily for the main staple food, which was wheat. And then the reduction which has happened based on the climatic scenarios, which we already published, as I said, and we have proved it on the ground, up to 80% reduction has already been happened within these peak demand periods. And this is terrible for Afghanistan. So during this peak demand periods, which is March till May and June, up to 80% reduction has been already witnessed. Yeah. And then from the winter and spring precipitation, there's already shift and proven. The shift has been done from winter and spring to summer or monsoon rains, for example. The monsoon recipients of the precipitation is normally, they are the eastern and northeastern part of Afghanistan, actually, which are producing a lot of, most of the food for the country. For example, Kabul, a host to around 6 million population, is mainly fed by the food production in the east of Afghanistan. Yeah. And then, as I said, the peak demand period, we have up to, in some months, up to 80% of reduction. And this is disastrous in the future. If the way it is, it continues, for example. And then in the last 4 to 5 years, we experienced this shift, which is from winter to spring to summer or monsoon rains. It has devastating consequences for Afghanistan, especially in the northeastern and eastern regions. As my friend Mayar said already, we have thousands of people already who suffered from fatalities and impacts of these floods, which were as a result of the intense rainfalls in summer. And we were not prepared for this. What I mean is we don't have enough reservoirs and storages structures to store this water and maybe mitigate the ill impacts of the water reduction that has been already occurred in winter and spring, for example. So what happens as a result of it, wash away the fertile soil layer for us. So in easy words, I would say it brings us reduced yield, reduced land and water productivity, for example, more dependency, and increased vulnerability of the local population whose main incomes come from agriculture sector. Having said this, already since the de facto regime came in power in Afghanistan, international assistance has been limited, actually. Yeah, there has been poor voices of the Afghans on international forums. Last year, for example, we had no representation in Afghanistan. As Qiyam and Dr. Mayar already said, according to the Informed Risk Index, we are ranking 4th in terms of the impacts of climate change that we are receiving at all levels. Let me say, there are already a number of reports, for example, that people in the capital, especially in the main cities, in Kabul also, they are migrating already because of the declined groundwater level. In Afghanistan, based on sectors, there's around 1% consumption in municipal sector only, mainly in drinking. 100% of water for drinking comes out of the groundwater aquifers. And this level is declining because we have reduced surface runoff, we have reduced precipitation, which halts the recharge of groundwater aquifer. So mainly for drinking water, where 1% of the total consumption hardly takes place, is at risk. Means if people have no access to water, I mean, they are going to die, in simple words. Yeah. Food production is, again, as I said, in order to survive, yes, they need water, and to feed, they need something to grow. And there's no, on one side, there is reduced water availability. On the other side, there are increased floods in the later part of the year, the later quarter of the year. there is going to another impact, and then people would have go for alternative. Alternative means, Kiam was asking me about displacement, migration. Countries like Europe, countries close to Afghanistan might receive enhanced number of they might experience migration from Afghanistan, because as I said, 80% of water comes from the snowmelt, and then if there is no snow anymore, or less snow, for example, or less amount of water available for agriculture, the purchasing power of people is already much lower than the historic levels. For example, around 29 million are already suffering. You can imagine the amplified impacts of the climate change. So what I would say, already the shift of winter and spring precipitation to summer is disaster, and there are no preparations. People in power there, they have no even understanding of what's going on in terms of science. And then we don't have voice in the global forums. COP28 is there, but Afghanistan has no representation. 29 million people are already at risk. Yeah, they're global WFP reports. And then the most affected is, as I said, the drinking water. People are already shifting from areas in Kabul and other cities. As I said, food security is one of the main concerns that's going to suffer. We don't have, I mean, when there's massive production already, or the neighboring countries, they stop their borders. They don't let the Afghan farmers sell their fruit. The fruit mainly, which has surplus production in Afghanistan, and the ultimate sufferers are the farmers, and then the local population. Displacement, as I said, to summarize it, you might experience more displacement, more out-migration from Afghanistan eventually, and that's a fact. It's going to increase with the passage of years. This year, we had flood hitting strongly the northern, the eastern and southeastern part of Afghanistan. Last year, the year before also, and it's going to amplify. Last year, we lost a whole village to the avalanches. Nobody survived there. And there is hardly on the global forum for discussion. Conflicts and competitions are going to maximize, and we can maybe speak about this more in details, but there were those points that I wanted
we can discuss this in the next session. Thank you so much, Dr. Fazal Akhtar, for your comprehensive insights and into how climate changes have contributed to increased vulnerability and humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan, particularly in terms of food security, displacement, water resources, and the current humanitarian crisis. Yeah, thank you so much for this, for sharing with us, and for simplifying this important topic with us, for us. So stay with us, and we can come back to you in the next part as well. Let me just ask the third question from another expert that we have, Mr. Izzatullah Siddiqui. Thank you for being with us, Izzatullah Siddiqui Saab. Your expertise in environmental governance, climate change, and disaster management is of immense importance for this discussion, given your background as the ex-technical minister at the National Environmental Protection Agency and advisory role in Disaster Management Authority, provides a unique perspective. Just to, I think there will be like lots of questions, but just to summarize, could you just provide some insight into the significant challenges that Afghanistan has confronted in responding to climate challenges from a government's perspective? And what barriers, challenges have impeded into their active participation in global climate dialogues, climate talks like COPs, and other international platforms and institutions? The floor is yours now.
Thank you. Can you hear me first?
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Mr. Ikram, and all your colleagues from the Refugee International. It's my great pleasure being here today with you and with this immense experts and my old friends and colleagues who are there around the world and here from Afghanistan. And thank you very much for Refugee International for organizing this very, very timely and important event, which for the last 2 years, the voice of the affected and victims and real victims of climate change has been silent due to several factors and reasons. In regard to your questions from the government perspective, the challenges which were faced in responding to climate change, they are many. But I will refer to a number of those challenges and hindrances that prevented us to tackle this huge problem here in Afghanistan. The first one, when you see before 2000, before the year 2000, unfortunately, Afghanistan had been in a devastating conflict and internal war. So we have lost 1 decade over there. And after 2000, when the new government and the new system came with the support of international community, that time Afghanistan was a country of rain. All was destroyed by war. So the main priority that time was given for the development, reconstruction, and rehabilitation of the country. From one side, on the development side, with the development aspect of the country, we were good. But unfortunately, considering the environmental protection issues, the environmental conservation, combating with climate change, and building the resilience against disasters, in this topic, we were so behind. It means that climate change and environment has not been a policy level priority. It means that this was not integrated in our national planning and programming. The second challenge was low or weak governance capacity. After 2000, up to 2010, as I have the experience of working in several ministries and organizations, the capacity was not that high to work on these topics. So we have lost some time over there. In addition to that, the third challenge was lack of experience and knowledge with this new topic. The topic of environment, which is still new in the world, but it was much more newer here in Afghanistan. So we didn't have appropriate experiences and knowledge of managing these devastating phenomena here in Afghanistan. The fourth challenge, it was low consideration which was given by our private sector to this topic. It means that the climate change, environmental protection, it was not respected, it was not deserved, it was not considered by our private sector. When I say private sector, it includes industrial development, construction development, agricultural development, urban development, mining, and all other sectors. In addition to that, it was not considered in the beginning of 2000 and 2001, 2005, 2010 by our academia. So there was not thinking about the issue of climate change, environmental protections. The same thing within our NGOs, UN, and the government as a whole. This was not a topic to be considered in our plannings, programs, projects, and interventions. The fifth challenge was our fragile socio-economic context. So when you work on building the resilience, competing or combating with climate change or protecting the environment, you have to work with the local communities. You have to work in cross-sectoral topics in agriculture, in mining, in urban development, and in other sectors. So in this case, when we were working with the communities, their socio-economic situation, it was a hindrance to consider this topic. The sixth challenge, as you know, and all knows, that Afghanistan is among and one of the least developed countries. It means that in terms of infrastructure, we were so behind compared to our regional countries or our neighboring countries in terms of roads, wastewater, water supply, agriculture, irrigation, and many other sectors. And the 40 years of conflict, this was another big challenge for us. Now, when we see the maps and assessments of the world, as Dr. Saib Mayor and Dr. Saib Akhtar said, Afghanistan exposure and vulnerabilities are at the highest. If you see the ND GAIN country index ranking, Afghanistan is 179th country among 186 countries. So it means from the bottom of the list, we are the sixth country. It means that our readiness is at the lowest level. It means our coping capacity and adaptive capacity is at the lowest. However, our exposure and vulnerability is at the highest compared to other countries. So it means that we are experiencing temperature risk, that I'm not going to the science of that. The previous two colleagues have been there. The main sectors which is affected by climate change, it is agriculture, water resources, ecosystem, biodiversity, forests and rangeland, livelihood and health, energy, and an increase in natural disasters, which are climate-induced disasters, I mean, drought, floods, extreme weather events. So these all put Afghanistan and prevented our development and our advancement in terms of combating climate change. So this was one part of your questions. The second part of your question is that the participation of Afghanistan in global climate talks and other international platforms or institutions. If you see, after 2005 and mainly after 2010, Afghanistan was in very, very good position in terms of accessing and getting membership in these global climate talks and accessing to global financial mechanisms like GEF, the Global Environment Facility, that we have received several projects on biodiversity, adaptation, afforestation, water management, and disaster management in these topics. However, after the incident of 2021 of August, that Afghanistan, the government changed and the issue of unrecognition of Afghanistan came, unfortunately, this political change prevented us, prevented the voice of 40 million of victims of climate change and the most affected people who are affected by climate change. It has been silent for the last 2 years. And we are afraid that this year there will be no chance for Afghans to go there. Although there may be some NGO colleagues or civil society activists, they might go there, but they are not in the position to go and to discuss and to raise the voice of the 40 million people. The second issue, the current priority is not climate change with the government, with the UN agencies, with the NGOs, and with the people of Afghanistan. The current priority is the humanitarian response and the humanitarian assistance to over 30 million people who are in need of life-saving assistance. And the third challenge, which is preventing our participation in the upcoming COP or other platforms in climate change, it is the capacity gap in the relevant ministries. So they cannot advocate and they are not able to try and to work with the international community to ask for their possessions, for their share, for their rights over there. They are member of the 1992 UNFCCC Convention, the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. So we are member from 1992, but now we are not allowed to go there. The fourth one, and this is my last point. The fourth one, climate change is politicized. However, when you speak here in Afghanistan with UN, with NGOs, with government, everyone says and everyone claims that it is not a political issue. But in practice, it is already politicized. If it is not politicized, then why Dr. Mayar is not able to attend on behalf of Afghanistan? Why I not can go there? Why Dr. Akhtar cannot go there? Why Mr. Mateen is not allowed to go there? And here in Afghanistan, there are many experts. They are able to go there and raise the voice of this people of Afghanistan. So these were my points in terms of the two parts of your questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Siddiqui Saab, for your comprehensive explanation and also for sharing your experience in terms of the governance challenges from time to time that Afghanistan has been facing, and also the advancement that you also share with us in climate change related by the government before 2021. I think the discussion is just getting more interesting, but we are just behind the time. So I think we will be just take to like 5 minutes or less than 5 minutes just to conclude the session on time. So stay with us and thank you once again, Siddiqui Saab. My final question in first part is from Alice Thomas. First of all, thank you so much for being with us and giving your extensive background in international nonprofits focusing on refugees, disaster management, and environmental issues. Your insights are highly valuable, bridging between the humanitarian and environmental aspects. So the question is just to shed light on the tangible consequences of Afghanistan's exclusion from global climate discourse, and how do these consequences extend beyond Afghanistan's border, particularly in terms of climate-induced migration and displacement, and based on your expertise and experience in this field. So the floor is yours.
Well, thank you. And again, thank you to you and Refugees International for inviting me. I feel very honored to be on this panel with so many experts from Afghanistan, so who have really informed me very much about the problem. So I will try to answer this question really in two parts. First, I want to just say as an introduction is that Central Asia Institute still works in Afghanistan today. Our mission is to promote education, especially for girls and women. Obviously, those programs have had to be cut back, but we are still doing a lot of education at the primary level. And one part of that is to educate children about climate change and the environment. So it's just to say that there are ways for organizations and other groups to continue to support climate education within the country. The gentlemen on this call are all very experienced experts, but we need to keep educating the next generation of Afghans about this problem and how to deal with it. To get to the question, so what are the tangible consequences of sidelining Afghanistan from the COP? Well, I'll answer it in two parts. First is what it means for Afghanistan and its people. And one thing about the Conference of the Party, the climate negotiations, they are the platform. They are the place for countries to stand in front of the world and make their case. And it's not just for the thousands of government officials and civil society representatives and UN agencies, et cetera, that attend, but it's for the world to watch. And I think probably somebody else can tell me how many millions of people tuned in to the Conference of the Party last year. So it is a global stage. So that missed opportunity is enormous. It's also a very important opportunity for Afghanistan as a country to be included in intergovernmental discussions, which come to decisions that are made by the Secretariat and the governments. And those key decisions relate to access to climate funding, as has been mentioned, and also the conversation is a very important conversation that is happening around loss and damage. And to hear a country itself make its own case as to why it is suffering irreparable loss and damage as a result of, the inability of the world to solve this problem is very compelling. And there's not really another place that governments and countries can make this argument so well. But there's also these kind of ripple effects of attending, which are for all the other reasons that countries go. There's so much kind of that happens behind closed doors at the Conference of the Parties. There is collaboration. Least development countries get together. They decide to join together in blocks as voting advocates for certain things. They form powerful relationships with each other. There's the personal networking that goes on for Afghan experts, like Mr. Siddiqui, to meet with the environmental representative from another country in the region or somewhere else in the world, or even somebody from USAID to talk about what the solutions are. Those relationships are enormously important, and the COP is a very important opportunity. To answer the second part of the question are, what are the implications of this for Afghanistan's neighbors in terms of climate-related displacement? You've already heard from the other experts that these complex factors of drought, the inability of the current regime to provide services for its people, lack of access to adaptation strategies and having been set back decades by the conflict. All of this means obviously that millions more Afghans will want to flee Afghanistan going forward. And as we know, Afghanistan already has one of the worst displacement crises in the world. Neighboring countries and people from Refugees International have written significantly about this and what's happening to Afghans and Pakistan in particular. So I urge you to read their reports. Governments in the region do not want to accept this burden alone. And even now, Pakistan is within this week has said that they may be basically refouling, all Afghan refugees that have come recently. So the crisis is really at a head. And without having Afghanistan participate, they can't be involved in really important discussions about what can we do about this. So you have a problem and you only have the people that are complaining about it, and you don't have the one country that can actually work with the world to form solutions to that. And there are new solutions being discussed about what to do about climate-related displacement and legal effective pathways and strategies to address that. So you're leaving one of the most important parties that can actually solve that problem out of that discussion. So I'm going to stop there because I want us to catch up with the time and make up the time that we've lost and hear from the other panelists.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you for explaining the consequences of sidelining Afghanistan in global climate talks like COP. and also for explaining the loss and damage and other climate funding, loss and damage funding, adaptation funding that Afghanistan can't access, and that was like the missed opportunities that has been happening right now. So thank you once again for explaining and for sharing your experience. We are just a little bit beyond the deadline, so we will, we will ask the question and to panelists as to participant for being with us. And now I would like to invite Jesselyn Perry to lead the second part of this. So now the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Kimuddin, for organizing all of us here today. And thank you to all of the panelists and everyone attending on my own behalf and on behalf of Refugees International. We're just thrilled to be partnering with such wonderful organizations and have such experts here to highlight the inclusion of Afghanistan in these global fora, especially the climate negotiations, which, as Alice mentioned, those facing the effects of climate change already and who will face the most extreme effects have already been historically excluded from these negotiations, and we know will continue to be marginalized, but we're going to do what we can to raise those voices and make sure they're being heard in decision-making halls. And with that, I want to start with one of our youth activists who's here today. Nasrat, thank you so much for being here. And as Alice mentioned, working with youth in Afghanistan, it's really critical to ensure that people know about the effects of climate change and know how to respond to the challenges of climate change. So could you please share with us your insights on how climate challenges are particularly affecting youth in Afghanistan and how youth might be responding to these impacts already?
Thank you, Jesselyn. First of all, thanks to Refugees International and partner organizations for organizing this important discussion. And it's a pleasure and honor to have the opportunity to share my perspective. Well, first of all, we can't acknowledge the effects of climate change on the youth of Afghanistan without understanding the context and the fact that the political turmoil and economic sanctions and the halt of the environment and climate change projects do more harm than good for the long-term development. It's important to note that the climate challenges in Afghanistan are intertwined with various other social, political, economic issues, which makes it even more difficult for us youth to navigate the space for climate action. I would focus a little bit on the bigger picture. Apart from the other losses and impacts that all the respective speakers mentioned. So the very first implication could be that climate change is creating forced migration and internally displaced persons or IDPs, which we witnessed in the recent events of droughts and floods in recent years. Because climate-induced disasters like floods and droughts can force families to migrate, which can then disrupt the education and social stability of young people. This displacement can then result in the loss of educational opportunities and their social networks. So climate disasters can damage the infrastructure and disrupt the education services in Afghanistan. Like the schools may be destroyed, or the students might have to travel longer distances to access education, or even worse, they may be forced to leave schools and try to join labor in order to work and to provide for the family. So this is a very serious issue, and this can hinder the access to quality education for Afghan youth, which has a very serious impact for achieving the Sustainable Development Goal which is quality education that the world is always talking about. In the meantime, climate change can increase conflict and instability, as other speakers also mentioned, regarding the competition for the scarce resources. And this can exacerbate the existing conflicts. And I personally believe, based on my understanding, that it can also fuel regional tensions and conflict, which we already see the signs of it. And of course, this insecurity and violence will disproportionately affect the youth. Because a society that is struggling to put food on the table, for example, its youth are more vulnerable to join extremist groups. So it will not only be conflict at the regional level, but also conflict and unrest within the country. So this is also a risk. which I would particularly relate this to, again, to Sustainable Development Goal 16, which is for peace, justice, and strong institutions. And above all, honest and transparent youth-led organizations are not given the access to the opportunities and to the funding available to take climate action, which could have been part of the solution. And the internally displaced persons or IDPs that I mentioned, they're actually unable to imply the same coping strategies and adaptations as the members of the host communities, which are already, they themselves are already like vulnerable, and it will take them to the extreme strategies. And they are often forced to turn to child labor, to early marriages, to selling children, to selling kidneys, which sounds quite dramatic, but that's unfortunately the harsh truth, which made headlines in recent years as a result of the crisis. So to simply put it, I call climate change the mother of all other crises in Afghanistan, which exacerbates everything else. And in bad economic times, priorities are usually shifted away from environmentalism. Like concern for the environment and climate change has now become an unaffordable distraction because we have more serious stability, issues regarding food security, regarding the livelihoods and humanitarian crises. So as youth, what we can do, we would rather reduce the burdens of climate change without having to rely constantly on humanitarian aid, which is unreliable, and sometimes it could be even political. We would rather develop a public-private sector giant initiative or initiatives, for example, that ensure the small-scale projects at community level, which can be also done in partnership with private sector, which will not only support livelihoods, but also help Afghanistan generate revenue. We can even work with our neighboring countries' environmental groups, for example, on technologies about climate action that can be shared between these neighboring countries to minimize the development gap that exists between the global north and the global south. So speaking on behalf of youth, I would say youth organizations are the engine of change. For example, with our valuable assets, for example, the volunteer members we have at ELH from different provinces of Afghanistan, who are the active eyewitnesses of the environmental degradation and the climate crisis in their communities. So we aim to be part of the solution, and we can design locally led initiatives and projects in response to the ongoing disasters. But such organizations and grassroots need support, so they should be supported. And above all, they should be given voice on international platforms. So I think I would conclude for that. I will conclude here for the related questions because of the time constraints, and maybe some other points I can discuss in the second section.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Yes, we'll come back to you with some specific questions on what our audience members can take forward as well out of this. But I wanted to come to Dr. Asim Meyer next. What specific outcomes might come from Afghanistan's participation in these climate dialogues? Is there anything that you're hoping to see come out of the COP28 decisions that will affect Afghanistan, even though negotiators from Afghanistan may not be present there? Over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Before coming to your question, I would like to highlight some points. Actually, I published an article about climate change, tackling the climate change post-2021. So there we have also saw that in 2018, the internal displacement people or IDPs were about 271,000, almost 300,000. So if we consider the population of Afghanistan, 30 million, it's 1% of the entire population. So you see, it's a very considerable figure that is being affected by the climate change in the form of droughts, floods, and other type of consequences. In addition to that, regarding your question, I would like to say that Afghanistan is true that will not be represented by the government or the de facto administration, but there are some youths that trying to participate. However, they do not have the official stance. That's why they cannot represent the Afghanistan correctly, because usually within this conference, the results of 1 year work has been presented there. So during the past year, unfortunately, once again, there was nothing done officially about the climate change. Particularly, I would like to say that the UNFCCC has a very clear structure that each country needs to follow. For example, each country needs to submit the national communication, that is the report that goes to the UNFCCC by the representative governments, which contains the effect of the climate change, strategies for adapting to that, and many things, many details. So Afghanistan so far submitted 2 communications, national communication, and the third one is now suspended. So you see, not only the adaptation has been suspended in the country, understanding of the climate change through the official channel of the UNFCCC has also been suspended. So without conducting in-depth research about preparing these reports that are required for the fulfilling the official documentation, representation in the COP is almost nothing. Though the international organizations like FAO, UNDP, and some others will reflect Afghanistan's voice like it did last year, the UNDP director echoed Afghanistan's voice, but I do not see that very effective. Because another issue is the mechanism of the financial mechanism of the climate change. You would see that all the international financial system that is dedicated to the developments of the developing countries is aligned to the SDGs. And you see, climate change is also one of the SDGs. It's very fortunate from one perspective, but it's very unfortunate that the climate change funds also go through the SDG framework. And because when it's SDG, it's Sustainable Development Goals, so it's a development finance. And when it is called development aid, the UN and the US sanctions stops it. And that's why Afghanistan is now not receiving any financial fund. So you see, during the previous regime, Afghanistan was receiving about $300 million per year. And when the government changed, 32 large projects of adaptation, mostly not only agriculture, but also energy and other projects, flood prevention, even the flood forecasting system that the World Bank was financing, and drought early warning system that World Bank was financing, has been suspended. And that worth about $826 million. And within the past 3 years, now Afghanistan received 30 million from the UNDP, through UNDP, and that is implemented through community development sectors of 2 projects. So you see, there is a very big difference. And as Dr. Siddiqui also mentioned, Afghanistan first lost 1 decade because of not understanding the climate change. I mean, the 90s until 2002 and 2005. But now Afghanistan is losing time because of the sanctions. And this is very unfortunate.
Thank you. And maybe we can.
What I'm coming up with, sorry. What I expect from COP28 is to discreditize the financial system of the climate change. It should not go, or it should not be labeled through the SDGs, and the climate change funds should not be affected by the sanctions and not politicizations. So that's what I expect, and I hope those who participate the COP ask the in charge or raise this point and give the fund to Afghanistan, who is mostly vulnerable. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think that's an important point. I want to move on to Dr. Akhtar on a similar question, as you were starting with your notes on the adaptation programs that have been paused over the past 3 years. And maybe picking up on Dr. Meyer's points, how can these international, both UN and other humanitarian organizations, as well as the multilateral developments, best support climate adaptation efforts and other programs for resiliency within Afghanistan? Over to you. You're on mute, Dr. Akhtar.
Thank you so much for the very valid question. I think international and humanitarian organizations or multilateral development banks, as you asked, they can support Afghanistan. But one of the most important, according to me, is the inclusion of Afghanistan into the climate discussions. Without inclusion of Afghanistan into discussion, it would be impossible to draw the attention of the international community, and because then the inclusion of Afghanistan into international agenda is also not possible without proper research having been done already. Unfortunately, as Mr. Siddiqui has been already in a very key role, and he highlighted very well, there has been least investment made in the research area, for example, by the international community to harvest the actual extent of the damage that's been done by the climate change. And the second thing was also very much important. There has been minimal investment made in the higher education sector by the international community to make climate change as one of the key topic or focus of the Ministry of Higher Education, for example. No single university in Afghanistan has been offering a specialized degree in climate change, for example. For a country where more than 80% of water comes from a snowmelt, and that's at risk, and there is no parallel research or academic initiative to study it, understand it, for example. We cannot expect always from the international community, but what we can also expect from the international community is that if they want to do the investment, do it in a way which is sustainable, for example, so that communities in countries can be made less dependent. So inclusion of Afghanistan into the main global agenda for climate discussion is of course on the top of my list. They say, and that comes after considering a proper research has to be done, a proper finances that to be done, because we cannot convince the international community also without having proper research done and with proper scientific figures. Another most important thing is, since the de facto regime is out of the discussion, they cannot be invited, for example, on the UN desk and so on. That's okay. But what can be done, as earlier said by Mr. Siddiqui, Afghan experts, for example, could be not necessarily for executive agendas or executive part of the agendas, but at least for passing on the Afghans' 40 million population's message to the global community. That can be done. What can also be done without politics is the capacity building of the ongoing institutions in Afghanistan. That's the higher education ministries, for example, higher education institutes, maybe civil society, plus investments made into the youth of Afghanistan, for example, providing them with the chances to study abroad, at least. If they cannot do anything, investment inside the boundaries, at least they could support some Afghan men and women to study outside. And for example, people like us sitting outside the borders, we do publish science now, and this is the main thing which you can argue with the neighboring countries. We already know, for example, the Afghanistan's tensions with Iran. This mainly about water, and to understand and have a constructive discussion, we have to have scientific figures to convince each other, and that's missing actually on the ground now. The current debate on the Kushtepa Canal construction between Afghanistan and Central Asia is another problem. We lost hundreds of engineers and workers while working on irrigation projects in Afghanistan because some neighboring country killed them simply. Yeah. What is understandable here is that there's a dire need for Afghanistan's inclusion into the global agenda. Research has to be done. FAO is there, UNDP is there, UNEP is there, and so many other organizations. They are dealing with climate change and associated issues. So they can produce knowledge, at least. For worst case, if Afghans are not allowed to. And therefore, capacity building and technical and finances can be made available through international conventions, having solid proof of the evidences from climate change and their impacts on agriculture and other associated sectors in Afghanistan.
Thank you. Thank you for all of those really important points. And we are very lucky at Refugees International to be able to have Kiamuddin representing us as part of our delegation at COP this year. So thank you, Kiamuddin, for doing that. And I want to turn now to Mr. Siddiqui. to talk about, not just from the youth perspective that we've heard earlier from Nasrat, but more broadly, how do you think Afghanistan's experiences and strategies in facing climate challenges at home can contribute to global resilience efforts? What can the world learn from Afghanistan's experiences, or what innovative solutions might you suggest? You're on mute as well. There you go.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you very much. I will just quickly come to the previous question you have from Dr. Saib Fazlullah and from Mr. Meyer. As you know, I have been 2 times, I have led the official delegation of Afghanistan into COPs. In 2015, I have been to Paris when the Paris Agreement was signing. I have been there to that COP, and in 2018, I have been to Poland. I think it was COP 24. That is our right. That is our obligation and responsibility to be there in the COPs. But important than COP is that we should be, the Afghans should have access to the financial resources which is discussed over there in the COPs. If we are not allowed to go to the COP, to sit there in the chair and just making, there is only the chance for 5 minutes of speaking there. 5 minutes only. So if that is not happening, we have to advocate much more for accessing on the climate financial resources. Our around 10 projects now suspended through Green Climate Fund, GCF, and the GEF, Global Environment Facility projects are suspended, and the Adaptation Fund projects are suspended. In addition to the climate financial mechanisms, other development projects which were contributing to building the resilience of the country in terms of early warning system, disaster management, adaptation, which were implemented and supported by World Bank, EU, the Asian Development Bank, and others. We should also request the international community to give us access back to those resources. Those funds will not go to the government. Those funds and those resources will go to the communities as it was in the previous government. 1 penny of those climate resources was not going to the Ministry of Finance of that government. It was directly spent by NGOs and UN agencies. I have extensive experience with these mechanisms in Afghanistan. So now your question was about the climate change adaptation strategies or projects which have been successfully implemented here in Afghanistan. As you know, in the last several years, we have implemented a number of projects we have received from the Global Environment Facility. One of the very small example I will make you, it was the SGP program, Small Grants Program. It was the Global Environment Facility financial resources, but that was implemented through UNDP here in Afghanistan under the leadership and supervision of the National Environmental Protection Agency. And I was leading that technical committee for this resources. The amount of these resources for each project, it was up to the ceiling of $50,000. It was specifically for the civil society and community-based organizations to develop innovative ideas for the protection of flood, for the flood protection, for the tree plantations, for the medicinal plants, for solid waste management, for the riverbank protections. So these projects were given to the very young and innovative ideas. We have several examples of this, which were implemented in the East, in Kunar, Nangarhar, Lagman, and in other provinces, in Bamiyan, Badakhshan, Balan, in Kabul. They were implemented, and we have learned good lessons out of those projects. The first impact and outcome it had, it was that we have developed the innovative ideas inside the very, very local and root communities. From the root cross communities, we have developed their innovative ideas. So that was one of the examples. And every year there was a conference by the GEF, the constituency meetings of the GEF, and then the Afghan people were going there and they were presenting their projects, their ideas, and their innovative ideas. One of the example was the production of paper bags instead of plastic bags, or cotton or cloth bags instead of plastic bags. And the same thing was there in Kole Ahmad Khan, the solid waste management. Although these projects were very small, we were not able to feel the real impacts in 1 year or 2 years with only a tiny amount of money, but it was very good start from the very community level towards the national level, to the provincial, and then to the national levels. So we have that experiences with us. But in terms of large-scale projects, unfortunately, we were not very good with those projects. To make a specific examples, for example, we were not able to plant, for example, 1 million saplings or 1 million trees, for example, or rehabilitated this number of hectares of land. So we didn't experience such projects.
Right. And maybe we can just move
of...
over to Alice now too, to bring her in on this question. Thank you for your insights there, Mr. Siddiqui. Alice, do you have any insights on how including Afghanistan more broadly might contribute to the international climate negotiations, whether at COP or more broadly? What steps might need to be taken to achieve this inclusion, and by whom? Or more broadly, just how your background working with women and girls in Afghanistan, the need for inclusion in some of these spaces and discussions plays out. Over to you, Alice. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the other speakers have talked about this need to have, obviously, all of the reasons, both for Afghanistan and its neighbors, why not having Afghanistan involved is just contributing to the bigger problem and compounding the problems that Afghanistan is facing. I would just say, I'm not really directly answering a question, but I would just bring in this issue about women and girls and inclusion, is that, the sanctions are what are basically preventing some of these development projects and climate adaptation projects from happening. So, beyond adding new exceptions to sanctions law, which could be a possible advocacy point for organizations to advocate for new areas of relief from sanctions. Right now, it is Afghan CSOs, civil society organizations, that are implementing all education projects. That is a requirement of the Taliban, and they are doing so very effectively. There's a very developed civil society there. So there are mechanisms by which we can be trying to promote that CSOs can responsibly be implementers of projects. And for those three areas where there are exceptions from the sanctions law, which are education, healthcare, and humanitarian aid, these are areas where climate change resilience has got to be built in. And for us, again, we do education projects. Unfortunately, because it's for girls and women, it's limited who we can support right now. But I think, Nasrat made a great point about youth and the ability just to support youth and give them the knowledge they need. But I think it's very important to use what available mechanisms we have to empower local civil society and youth. And then the second thing is all of the Afghans who are outside of Afghanistan, and how can we empower them, all including so many people on this call, to get more knowledge and expertise and participation. So obviously, number one, having them all, to the extent they already are, great, participating in this COP, but also the next COP. This COP is here. So, we need to start planning for the next COP, because it takes a long time to get, do all the groundwork. So let's talk about following up with this great discussion about, okay, what could we practically do if there's no formal participation of the de facto authorities? What could we practically do to really elevate the voices and the need for Afghanistan to be heard, both at the negotiations and then at so many other international fora where the de facto authorities are not participating? So it's not just the COP, but it's so many other discussions, right? The SDGs, everything else. So that conversation has to start now, I would say. Women and girls, there are 20 years of Afghan women that have just a whole generation of educated advocates. I don't see any of them on this call, but they are also fierce advocates for education and why education of women is one of the top solutions to climate change. If you read Project Drawdown, which is a wonderful project that was done about what are the top 10 solutions for mitigating and addressing climate change, I think number 5 is educating women and girls, period. You don't even have to educate them about climate change, but just to have educated women leads to healthier families, and women are farmers. So there are things that we can be doing, and I think we need to plan now and think about that. And thank you all for letting in this discussion, and Refugees International for starting this discussion.
Thank you, Alice. And for those on the call who don't know, we are indebted to Alice because she actually started Refugees International's climate displacement program several years ago. And so she was at the forefront of a lot of these conversations. So thank you, Alice, for being here. And we are trying to get to as many panelist questions as we can via typed response, because we see them and we want this to be a discussion. So thank you all for that. And as we close, I'm going to give each panelist 1 sentence, please, to, if you really need, advice to our audience members as we approach COP28. What concrete steps can people take to raise awareness and advocate for greater inclusion of affected communities, including the people of Afghanistan, but others as well, in these climate negotiations? And so our resident activist, Nasrat, I'm going to start with you.
Thank you so much. Well, I would say engage and support the NGOs and advocacy groups. This is specific for people who are inside. If we have, of course, we have some foreign participants, I would say contact your government representatives or other network that you have within the UN organizations to advocate for the inclusion of Afghanistan, because as colleagues said, there are many impartial organizations and NGOs, experts, scientists. UNFCCC can delegate one of these to at least to represent the voice of 40 million people. We shouldn't be making everything political, and there are ways to do it. And overall, let's advocate for equitable climate financing for vulnerable countries, especially Afghanistan.
Thank you. And that is such an important point, as the Loss and Damage Committee will be finalizing its recommendations through the Transitional Committee next week. The last meeting will occur, and then they'll present those recommendations at COP to operationalize that fund. So Dr. Meyer, I'll turn to you next for your recommendations for the audience.
I would like to suggest that please either do a compromise for Afghanistan or change the financial mechanism of the climate change in order to allow or enable the vulnerable communities to receive this fund for their adaptation into this crisis. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Meyer, and Dr. Akhtar, to you now.
Thank you very much. In addition to what my colleague said, I would say invest in research, quantify the damage so that assistance could be made.
That is so important. Thank you as well. And Mr. Siddiqui, we'll turn to you.
Yeah, thank you very much for the last question. As you know, just yesterday I returned from Bamyan, where we had a discussion on climate change with almost 60 people. Around 30 were girls and women from the civil societies and the presence of the government ministries. We had the same in 5 major cities: Bamyan, Herat, Mazar, Kandahar, Nangarhar. On 6th of November, we will be having the final and conclusion of that. The results of those discussions we will be sharing here with the national government, UN agencies, and NGOs. For the COP, for the upcoming COP, as we have discussed with UNAMA here, we will be conducting a good event here, and we will be raising the voice of the people who are here along the 2 weeks of the COP meetings. So I request all my colleagues, when we are inviting them, please join us to raise our voice inside from Afghanistan for the COP and also for the financial mechanisms. Thank you.
Thank you. And Alice Thomas, over to you for one piece of advice for audience members.
Well, it's hard to add to all that because those were all the best and most excellent suggestions. I just would reiterate that we just have to empower youth and CSOs to be part of this in every way that we can. We have to make virtual events possible because if people can't go in person, it's enormously important, often forgotten. And I would say, let's use social media and say, where's Afghanistan? Hashtag, where's Afghanistan? Like, why aren't they here? Whatever it is, something to really get a discussion going around this more broadly.
Thank you. And thank you all so much for the wisdom you shared today. I think we've made one step towards sharing that wisdom more broadly, but we'll continue the conversation. And I want to turn it back over to Kiamuddin in case he has any final things to say. But thank you to everyone for being here today.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jocelyn, for your time and also for leading the second part of this webinar. I think we have lots of questions, but I think some of them have been already answered by the experts as well. So we are just at the end of, I think we are just at the end of this webinar. So we couldn't, I think we are not able to take the questions. Jocelyn, can we take if there is any possibility?
I think that we are likely going to wrap up, but if anyone would like to send their contact details, please feel free to put that in the chat, and then maybe the panelists can follow up directly with you on your questions. But this has been a really engaged audience, so we appreciate everyone for attending today.
Yeah, I think this is a really great idea. I think everyone could share their contact details like the experts. And then if any of the participants have any questions, so they can directly ask from them. I once again thank you to all of the participants for joining this important webinar, and the panelists for sharing their experience and for giving us the time, and also for the communication department, and also the interpreters for interpreting the session, the overall session. So I think I'm grateful and thanking again for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you all.
And keep educating for Afghanistan from any platform.
Absolutely.